I'm Nelson Parker, son of Tom Parker, and originate from Tutamoe, which is in the Waipoua forest. Our family farm had 700 acres and 7/8 of our boundary was virgin forest. And my father was an axeman, a logger and a farmer. Him and Eddie Olsen, a good friend of his, an axeman mate, they teamed up as a cross-cutting team. They went down to National Park, did a lot of Rimu, Matai, Totara down there, and they went to the Great Barrier and felled Kauri there. 1939 they got called up to the war. My specialty was the standing block, and if you can imagine fronting up to a big tree, they would have to direction fall it, so they'd have a scarf, and normally they would cross-cut the bottom cut and then they would chip away at the top cut until they made a scarf to allow the tree to fall in the direction. You know, some of those trees were 2-3 metres in diameter, and they could be cutting a scarf all day, you know. Two of them, one from each side, a left-hander and a right-hander. I used to cut left-handed. My father used to cut right. When they cut the logs, the smaller trees, when they'd head them, they would stand on the log and they would cut it off, and that was the underhand between your legs. And then they'd also have the jigger chop, which you would climb up the boards, and they used to saw off there as well as chop. Trees that had big buttresses, so that was called the jigger. And of course you've got your sawing events with the single and double saws. So that was all derived from the day of the axe and the saw, where the cross cutters felled the trees, and everything was done manually. You know, teams of ox, bullocks. In 1950-51, Dad travelled through Australia and competed Victoria and in New South Wales, and he went to the Sydney show. And the competition, you know, I mean, the Australians were, well, they still are New Zealand's best competitors because they had the same industry as we did, and they were very good axemen and still are today. So the Sydney show has always been recognised as the top of the list. If you can, you know, win at Sydney, then you've basically achieved the top of the, you know, achievements. No one believed that I had the ability to win Sydney, but I didn't myself. But it was very, very difficult, and took about 5 years before I actually won it. You know, you build this thing in your head that they were impossible to beat, okay? And then, of course, when you beat them convincingly in big events, then you just chuck all that out the window. And so that's what happened that day. You thought, okay, I hammered him, you know, and of course it was one of many to come. I mean, like my father said, he says, you'll get more hidings than you'll give, but, you know, when you give them, it's good. I won the 15-inch standing block at Sydney in 1993. I placed in it every year I went in it, in the final. Of all my chopping career, that would probably be the most important event on the most important day, and so everything you talk about peak performances, well, that was a peak performance that whole day. And of course, you know, you think, oh, okay, you know, you won it by 9 seconds, and which is almost unheard of in a final of that calibre, because normally you're talking, I mean, Jason Wynyard pipped me in 1996 in the same event by 1/100th of a second, you know, so that's like shutter speeds on your camera almost, and you know, like, so there's a lot of things have got to come into place. You don't fluke it, you don't fluke those things. You've got to be extremely fit, you've got to have very good gear, you've got to understand the wood, and you've got to pace yourself and everything. You've got to not let the pressure get to you. Wood chopping was the #1 priority. I used to work to subsidise my sport, and so therefore I realised if I wanted to meet the goal and to achieve the ultimate, I had to go to Australia. And my father was basically a great encouragement in that respect. He never really come to many of the events with me at all, but we'd do a lot of table talk, and I learned, and that's probably more what you'd call theory. Brian Trow said to me one day, he says, slow down, and he says, you'll break records. And that's what I did. I slowed down and I broke records. Okay, so there's a tuatahi, see? There's a line running through here. This here is what they call Swedish tool steel, and it has a certain hardness, and that is attached to the eye, okay, which is this part here. This is softer steel. That's only got to hold the handle. And this is the hickory handle, okay, so this is a handle that suits me. So on here you see a bevel, and that's what we call a 15 degrees. Then if you put a straight edge from that there to here, there is about 1 millimetre of air gap through here, and that's what, so you must have that. This is dead flat from here out to the edge, and then you put your edge on. Now this is reasonably polished, and so you've got to cut down all friction, all resistance. So polishing an axe is quite important. In anything you do in your life, input will determine your output, and wood chopping's no different, you know.